Isn't it crazy how small our world is?
Yeah, construction especially.
It's wild.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really small. And like the paving world, I mean, you know it better than I do. It is tight knit. It is really tight knit.
I did a little introduction email yesterday between Gaz and Farr. You know him, with Tilka, and technical paving program guy at ASU, Hassan. And I shot him an email and was like, hey, Gaz and Farr wanted to kind of maybe talk to you about furthering his education at ASU or whatever. Yeah. And I got an email back from Hassan and he said, hey, what's up, Gaz and Farr? Looks like we studied at the same college in Turkey. I'm like, what? This is craziness. It was, I never would have guessed in a million years.
That's funny.
And it was.
He's been all over the world.
Gaz?
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy's legit.
Yeah. Well, I saw him in Vegas in, I don't know, whenever it was, October. I was like, how long have you been here? He's like, since Miami. I'm like, oh, you poor guy.
Even before Miami a little bit. He was traveling over there and doing pre-construction stuff.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So did you grow up in Arcadia area, Paradise Valley area, Scottsdale? Oh, Tukey.
But then I moved in like 6 years, so.
To Arcadia? Okay. Sweet. Yeah, I grew up in Paradise Valley. And then lived in Arcadia for a little bit and then went back to Paradise Valley growing up. Yeah. So what part of town are you in?
Gilbert.
You're in Gilbert.
East Valley. Yeah.
Gilbert's the place to be nowadays, apparently.
It's getting a little too much. It's craziness.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff out there now.
We've shied away from going downtown because everywhere you go, no matter the day of the week, it's like 45 minutes for everything.
Yeah, well, that's how it is here.
Yeah, it's nutty.
Well, I hadn't been downtown in 6 months, and I go downtown Monday, and it's like, this is why I don't come downtown.
Yeah.
This is why I don't bother with this place. This sucks. How long have you been at Sunland for?
14 and a half years, I believe.
How'd you start? Did you go to college, or did you just start in the back of a paver, or what?
I started at my uncle's family business back in Michigan, or that's where I'm originally from.
Yeah.
And it was not my plan.
Yeah.
My plan, I really wanted to be a helicopter pilot. And so
that's very different.
Yeah. I despised construction. I thought they were crusty people, old dickheads that just screamed. And it was like that.
It was.
And my uncle was like
fair
that.
Assessment. Yeah.
And so I wanted to not go down that road, but I always found myself kind of during the summers working and started liking it, and the money, like I made a decent amount of money.
Yeah.
And so I got hooked.
Well, especially, did you say Michigan?
Yeah.
Yeah, Michigan, it's seasonal. So
seasonal.
You're working long hours and you're taking home
it was unreal.
Paychecks.
Yeah. For a 15-year-old kid during the summer to make that kind of money.
Yeah. So I worked for Pearson, my first job. They don't exist anymore. Then I went to work.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, they were back in the day. And then I went to work for Markham. And then I went to work for Skanska when they were still doing civil work in Phoenix area. And they sent me out to the railroad. And so it was my first time working like mega hours and getting per diem as well. And the first few checks I took home, I mean, I was doing 70, 80 plus hours a week because we're on a 7-day a week schedule, nights, weekends. We're working for the railroad. The railroad does not care.
Yeah.
And then per diem, over $100 a day as a kid. And just the checks I was taking home were huge. And so that was the first time where I was like, okay, like this isn't so bad. Because especially when you're young, you're like, and especially if you're working out of town, I'll work as much as you want because there's nothing else to do. Like, I'm going to go hang out at the hotel in Yuma. No, thanks. I just want to work.
That's our mindset when we travel. It's like, what do? You work, you get the job done, and you try to come home.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing to do in some of the towns like Yuma. That means probably get dinner somewhere, but you live in Gallup, New Mexico for a couple of years. Your goal is to work your tail off and get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
Get back home.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just in last week, Corona, New Mexico. In the middle,
Where's that?
It's there's not much
No,
there.
it's nowhere.
It's like right in the middle of New Mexico, and they're building a wind farm out there.
Okay.
And everybody lives in a trailer, and it's just
Miserable.
We're just here to work. Yeah. But you're making a killing. So, how'd you get linked up with Sunland?
Well, I had a buddy that his parents had a winter home in Paradise Valley. And so he just called me up one day and he's like, come out here, let's get an apartment, see what we can do. So I came out, packed up my little Jeep, hauled ass across the country like an idiot. Yeah. Had no idea where I was going. And I interviewed at Sunt, and they were hot and heavy into the light rail section. So I interviewed. Like 10 minutes later, they called me and said, hey, head over here for a drug screen. So I got on the light rail with them, and it was like the crazy hours like you were talking about, nights, days, weekends, everything you can think of.
That must have been like the heyday of the light rail too.
It was.
Yeah.
It was 2006, so I had a good 2 years or so before Phoenix started pulling, and Valley Metro and Phoenix started pulling sections, and we all kind of thought we'd retire on the light rail. They were planning on just building miles and miles and miles through Phoenix. But, and then the whole thing happened, and they wanted me to go over to Fort Hood. I wasn't ready to move out of Phoenix. So were cool.
Where's Fort Hood at?
Texas.
Yeah.
They had a project on the base over there. And
they do a lot of like runway work for the military.
They do all kinds of work.
Yeah. They're pretty like, cause I looked at a job with Sunt on a military base. They were doing concrete paving, but yeah, they do all kinds of stuff.
Sunt's a good company. I really liked working for them.
They're big time.
They are big time, but they're just a good company.
Yeah.
I mean, it's from top to bottom. From what I know about them, they're ran really well. They've got good people at all levels of the company, and it makes it a good place to work. It was great.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
So then, I stayed in Phoenix, and got a hold of, actually, Sunland reached out to me when they were starting their public works division right around that time, and needed some help on the milling side of things. And so we made my way over, started on the milling side of things, and kind of just worked my way up and around and over and through our division.
Well, the company is significantly different today than it was when you started.
It's hard to imagine. Like, it's hard to even, when I lived through the last 15 years of it, and it's just thinking back, even like 10 years ago, it's like, this is nutty.
Yeah.
What we've done, and all the great people we've been able to hire and work with. And just, we've done some, monumental's a big word, but it's, in my opinion, just living through it and being part of it, we've done some monumental things. Like, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
In 15 years.
Well, and I mean, if it's paving in the Phoenix area, it's probably you guys. Odds are that it's you guys, I think.
Very likely.
It's very likely. Yeah. I just, are you guys paving Camelback right now? Or is that somebody else?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. I meant to ask you earlier, but I saw that was about to get resurfaced when I was last there. They're lowering all the manholes. And I was explaining to somebody how they do resurfacing in Phoenix, and it just blew their mind. So they're like, what do they do with the manholes? I'm like, well, they come in and they put them all under the profile, and then they just pave over the top of it, and then they bring them all back up. They're like, what?
Which is the right way to do it. Like,
yeah.
I really like, it's not done like that all over the country. Paving back in Michigan, it's a headache paving around all those obstacles. And it's pretty cool that City of Phoenix ponies up the money to treat it like that and pay to lower and adjust when we're done.
How, Sunland, how many people are at the company now?
I think we're just over 900.
So you're running a lot of paving crews and putting down a lot of asphalt every year. Yeah. Just tons of it. Literally. I mean, millions and millions of tons of it.
Yeah. Well over 1 million, I would assume, a year.
Yeah. But you're in the Southwest.
Yep.
And this project in Florida comes up for a racetrack for I'm just going to avoid the particular brand here
Mhm.
for good measure, but
Sure.
it's for a particular racing series that's
Mhm.
really, 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 really fast, and starts with like a letter between A and F. Say.
Yes.
Yeah. And then a number after that between 1 and 3. And it's the fastest of the 3.
Yeah.
This track, they need to resurface it.
Yeah.
It's in Florida, in Miami. First, how does a company, cool, you're great at paving in the Southwest, but there's a lot of great paving contractors east of the Mississippi. How do you guys end up as the ones to resurface this track?
You got to have a history, a little bit of a resume, to kind of get on the radar of people that are going to be hunting you down for stuff like this. So we did have a decent history of paving some local club tracks in Arizona. So we paved Apex Motor Club in 2018, and then from there we went to Indy Motorsports Ranch down in Wilcox.
Okay.
And then up to Atessa at Podium Club, just I guess southwest of Casa Grande. So that's kind of what I guess got us on the map. That is what got us on the map. I think the biggest thing out of it is when we paved Atessa, we paved an Echelon, which we had done in the past and we were getting pretty good at.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were at Atessa, we paved that, all 3 pavers under machine control in Echelon.
Mm.
So I think that's probably the biggest thing that they were looking at, and just our understanding and being able to pull off a road course under full machine controls.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. I don't think it's ever been done in the United States with 3 pavers under machine controls all at once.
Okay.
I believe it hasn't. It's been done with 2 that I know of, but it's not easy. It's a tremendous amount of coordination. A lot of people involved. You all got to be on the same page. You got to understand the technology. You got to, have a good plan in place. And then ultimately execute. You got to be ready for instruments to act all janky and go offline and just shut down for whatever reason. Just little things like that. You got to kind of be ready for, and we were, and we executed. We were successful. It was good.
So and my understanding is they do their homework on who has that kind of resume, and they essentially reached out to you and said, hey, there's this opportunity.
Yes.
And it's more of a interview process than a bid. Like it's less a resurfacing job where you're just pricing it and the lowest bidder gets the money.
Yeah.
It's more so qualifications based. It's more nuanced. Like there's a lot more to this than the price.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was kind of funny. You're absolutely right. But in the initial interview, there was, and I think back about it, and Gazin Farr was in there, and he was asking some very specific questions.
Yeah.
And Dr. Rob, have you met Dr. Rob?
Maybe.
Robert Rasmussen.
I've talked with him online. Yeah. I talked to him on the phone the other day, actually. Yeah.
They asked very specific questions. And I remember that from the first interview.
Uh-huh.
They knew what they were looking for. They knew that job a lot better than we did. So there were specific questions to that job that I would have never known, but essentially more like how you're going to navigate these issues or challenges. And yeah, that's how it initially started when they reached out.
So you get the job, and then the schedule, the unique thing about this job too is that they somewhat tell you what the schedule is. It's a little less flexible, I guess. You have a window in which you do the work, correct? Like,
yeah.
You've got it from this date to this date.
Initially, there was a pretty quick start.
Yeah.
But then one thing I didn't know, or we didn't know really, like they had a massive build out going on campus. They had new pits going in. They had, all kinds of stuff going in.
Yeah.
And tremendous amount of work that we had to work around. And I didn't know they were already under construction on a lot of that stuff.
Uh-huh.
So when we initially started planning it, we're like, oh, I told them right away, like, we need elbow room. We got, all these instruments that need to be shooting here, whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, cool. Everything's good. We get there and look at it. I was like, yeah, everything's wide open.
Sure.
And then slowly as the days go by, you're starting
more and more. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like you're working in a tunnel after a while. And I was like, come in after a weekend and grandstands are going up here like hundreds and hundreds of feet long, 50 feet high. It's like, oh God, hold on, what's going on?
Yeah.
Getting built in on. And so initially that is not something that I could foresee, I guess. And I didn't foresee that, but we did a really good job of working with the GC, working with Tilka and Kazanfar and our teams, like all working together to kind of manipulate our schedule, manipulate the plan, manipulate the phasing. I mean, on a daily basis, to make sure that construction could keep going, because that's a huge part of it. The track was a very important part of it, but also had to have the pits done for the teams to come in and do their thing, right? So there's,
and I guess on that note, the complexity is you have a NFL stadium in the middle, that runs through the season, so that the track is technically partially in a parking lot for the NFL stadium.
Yeah,
and so they use this entire facility dual purpose. One for NFL and for a bunch of other stuff, I take it, for the stadium. And then two, they have to transform it into a racing circuit. And then I think they had a temporary paddock for the first time they ran this race.
Yes.
And then when you were there, they were building that like an enormous permanent installation. But then that's the only real permanent piece. And then they have to build the entire track every year. So it looks like a parking lot when there's no track, but then they build an entire track around this whole area. And so I guess that's part of the reason why that schedule is so constrained, and they have windows for things, and it's like, you don't miss the window. It is what it is.
They have, the Miami Open there. So that's huge. Tennis comes in, and then they have concerts and I mean, you name it.
Crazy.
When we were there, the Miami Open, they had the Miami Open. And so they build out the inside of the stadium. They pave, all that's in there, that with the build out. And, it is. It's crazy how they transform it. And when the race isn't there, you're right. Like, a good part of that track runs through the parking lots. A good part of it. I don't know what percent, but well over 50%, 60% is straight through their parking.
It's crazy.
And then, it crosses the turnpike. It crosses FDOT's right away, multiple areas. So that was hitting those closure deadlines along with everything else. It was
so
extremely complex.
Well, and so, it's really complex. And then you have to mobilize. So you guys mobilize your entire crew and almost everything from the Southwest, from Arizona over to Miami, across pretty much the United States.
It's pretty much the United States.
Pretty much the United States.
Yeah.
You get there, and the first task is milling, because you're replacing an existing racing surface. So you're not replacing the entire cross section. It's really just the top layer, the really expensive, really accurate, really particular part of the track.
Yeah, and that they wanted us to mill off roughly 2 inches, and then do a little bit of corrective milling. I guess there was some stuff they wanted fixed as far as roughness, smoothness. So that was the first part of construction. Once we got there, the limits were a little foggy when we got there. We worked initially with them to identify exactly what the limits were, the edge lines. And, there was, when we initially looked at it, we just thought, okay, we're going to resurface the whole thing. But then we kind of talked through some things like, there's certain areas that we didn't really need it. It's outside maybe the barrier in some areas. So we trued up the edge lines and made it flow really nice through the circuit. It was good.
Because the edge lines on a typical circuit, you just take it from curb to curb, essentially. But because there's no clear curb to curb on a lot of this, you have to essentially figure out where exactly the track's going to be once the track is built around the pavement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a unique deal, because it's like partially purpose built circuit, partially you're crossing streets, like you said, you're crossing the turnpike, you're in a parking lot.
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit of everything. It's not a street circuit, but it's not entirely a dedicated circuit, which is, I guess, a little simpler. Like on a dedicated circuit, it's not easy, but you at least don't have to worry about traffic driving.
Things are established. Yeah. There was, there was things established here, but it's not you were crossing access roads throughout the campus. We're crossing turnpikes. So there's match points that we absolutely have to hit. So yeah, it did make it a little tricky kind of navigating all that stuff through the campus. Like there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So you pretty wild.
You mill everything up. You get to the paving portion of it. Do you use 2 mills for the milling?
Yes, I think for the most part we used 2. We had 3 there. One as a backup.
And you try to keep it to as close to the existing profile as you can?
Yeah, our goal was to do that. I mean, true up a little bit of some of the inconsistencies in the surface, but yeah, we didn't want to deviate from the existing surface because we had to tie in. You have match points on the edges, so we can't do too much, right? Because when we come back and pave, we've got to tie back into those and make sure they're flush and true, I guess.
Yeah. I guess the schedule, how many weeks did you have to do from start to finish?
I think originally we gave them about a month, something like that.
So
that was purely construction. So then we, on the front end of that, we had our time to mob in, set up our equipment, survey. There was weeks and weeks of survey in advance to construction to go around the campus, identify control, tie them down, and make sure survey was ready to go. To check the model, do all our back checks and all that. So survey was a couple weeks in advance, but then our crews had to come in and mechanics come in with the equipment and make sure nothing was damaged in transport, measure up things. We had equipment coming right off job, so there was a decent amount of cleaning equipment up and making sure it was pristine for the start, right?
Sure.
So the construction we planned just under 30 days, but there was a couple weeks in advance for equipment setup, even a week or 2 in advance for survey of that, and then demobbing on the back.
Gotcha. So we get to the paving, which is where that's the bulk of the work. That's why you're there, obviously.
Yeah.
The machines are set up in a very particular way, and there's a lot of technology. Do they require all this technology, I take it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all, it was all written in the spec.
Yeah. So they specify, because I know in Vegas they had to get essentially brand new equipment.
Roughly. Yeah.
And all brand new stuff to meet the spec. And so the technology on it, it's all machine control.
On the paving, it wasn't. We used our non-contact.
Okay.
Long, like averaging skis.
Okay.
Which is, that's the good stuff right there for smoothness.
Yeah. So, but the pavers had thermal, like infrared.
Yeah, infrared mapping, thermal mapping.
We had
those systems set up on each paver, and then we had intelligent compaction systems and for pass mapping, things like that on our rollers. So the thermal mapping,
and correct me if I'm wrong, all that really is doing is basically recording the temperature of the entire mat as it comes out the back of the paver.
Yep.
To make sure that the temperature is consistent.
Consistency is the biggest thing they're looking for.
Yeah.
But then also just making sure it's where it needs to be temperature wise.
Yeah. Okay. And people have told me you had a shuttle buggy in front of every paver, 3 pavers, typically, with a shuttle buggy in front of every one of them.
Yeah.
And the shuttle buggy helps just keep the paver moving at a consistent rate, which is important, one. but then also mixes everything up so that you do get that consistent temperature.
Yeah.
Because that's the two primary benefits of it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So what you're looking for in the MTV is remixing. When material can get segregated coming out of the plant, it can get cold, on the drive over, when you're hauling over, depending on how long the haul is. But when it gets into the buggy, it takes it in and it dumps it into a big hopper, and it has a remixer. So anything that got too cold on the haul over, probably 2 to 5% maybe 2% of the load.
Yeah.
It gets mixed back in with the other 98%. That's just, up to whatever temperature you're looking for.
Sure.
Blends it back in, heats it back up. And then also, if there's any segregation in the aggregate, it tries to pull all that back together and remix it. And then when it puts it back into the paver, you got a more heat consistent, more aggregate consistent. And you're just looking to get rid of segregation, whether it's aggregate or heat. That's what they do.
What happens if there are cold spots? Like what's the downside of that?
There's a couple. I mean, it doesn't compact properly, and it won't go under the screed like it should. When asphalt gets cold, it'll tend to hook on the bottom of the screed. So if asphalt's nice and hot, so you're 330 degrees, you got a nice black glossy finish, and you get a clump under there or an area that's colder, you're not going to have that gloss. It's going to separate, it's going to drag, and you're not going to have the same surface voids. It tends to pull apart a little bit.
I see.
That's something you don't want. And it's something that that'll get picked up in the thermal mapping.
Mm-hmm.
If you have nice consistent heat, and then you have an area of the mat that is segregated, pulled apart a little bit, it cools quicker. So you're gonna see that there's an issue there.
Okay. And then the intelligent compaction is essentially, it's actually pretty slick. You're just looking at that screen and it's just mapping exactly where that roller's been. And it's almost like coloring in a way. Because I know it changes colors as you, what's the color when it's not? Does it go from red to green?
It all depends.
Or you can change it.
You
rainbow
can
color.
change it. Yeah, you can change it.
But
it's essentially a rainbow.
Yeah, but you're essentially, the goal of the roller operator, to make it very simple, is to make the color go from one color, which means it hasn't been rolled, to the other color, which means it's been rolled just enough. But you can also over compact, right?
Yeah.
So you want it just right.
And that's the idea behind the pass mapping. One of the big ideas is making sure you're not over compacting, making sure you're getting consistent full width coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that we practiced on in the parking lot. We had our roller operators out there. We painted out a section of the track, and to get them in sync, because you don't typically have 8 or 9 roller operators working together all at the same time. So to get them in sync, we did some practicing in the parking lot, and we're watching our pass map, or our pass mapping, and making sure that we were getting consistent passes in the same area, but then also not overlapping too much. So we would go out there, we'd do some practices, we'd come in, we'd look at it, and we'd look at our overlap or maybe some gaps that we were leaving, and did some practice there to make sure we were in sync.
Yeah.
And flowing properly.
I'm glad you brought that up. The whole practice strip. I remember it was in the parking lot.
Yeah.
But it was the actual mix and everything. And you did that before you started paving at all.
Yeah, it was one of the requirements for mix verification. I mean, making sure our equipment handled it properly. Pretty gummy, pretty nasty stuff. And then also, we sampled, and it was an opportunity to look at the mix and core it and make sure, our voids were looking good.
Okay. What happens if you overcompact asphalt?
Tends to get brittle, break apart.
Okay. I see.
Yeah. So
you want, I guess, a little bit of flex in there, but you don't want too many voids. What happens if you don't compact it enough?
Breaks apart. Ravels, essentially, yeah.
So you want that sweet spot to make sure that, I guess, the racing surface is really as durable as you can get it for as long as you can get it, because this is an expensive process, resurfacing a track.
Yeah. It's pretty expensive.
before I guess we get to the paving, the mix design is extremely specific.
Yeah.
This is not your everyday asphalt that you're putting down on this racetrack. It's completely different than a highway, than a road, than anything else.
Yeah.
It's as specific as it gets really in the world. What do you have to do to figure out the design? Because that was one of the most surprising things to me, is like, it's almost a puzzle. You almost have to figure out how the design works and how to make it a reality to even get the asphalt you need.
That was all figured out before we got there. We didn't have anything to do with the mix design between Dr. Rob and Tilka.
Okay, so they helped you with that.
Well, they did it all.
They did it.
They went and did the investigation on the pit sources and found the one they wanted.
Gotcha.
And that's not, we weren't really involved in that. It was,
okay.
We understood it. They gave us the mix design. We knew what we had to do with it, but as far as building it, aggregates coming from out of state, all that stuff, they did the investigation, hunted down the source they wanted, and figured out with the GC how to get the aggregates in town to where, we could use a local plant.
Where did the rock come from? Somewhere in the South.
Yeah, I want to say Tennessee.
Yeah,
if I remember right.
That's what
It's a good question. I should know off the top of my head, but yeah, we weren't really involved in. I believe it's Tennessee somewhere.
Okay, and then I guess two components of asphalt: rock and aggregate, sand, and then the glue, which is the binder.
Mm-hmm.
The binder is also pretty specific, and there's a lot of testing involved in making sure that it all goes together once it's all on site.
Yeah.
And you guys were involved in the testing?
As far as the mixed property testing, we were not.
Yeah.
Dr. Rob and his team of people handled all that. The testing we did, on-site testing for compaction. We brought our people in.
Gotcha.
From Arizona. They traveled with us. We did do a little bit of testing at the plant on the loads of binder coming in. We did some softening point testing. With another firm that we work with a lot. So we had them in for that.
So then you worked with a local plant to make this mix specifically for the job.
Yeah.
With your specific special aggregate, your specific special binder, which then made the special asphalt that you needed just for this job. Which is not unusual, making different mixes for different jobs. But I guess it is unusual because you're an out-of-state contractor. And so did you have to find the plant?
We didn't. So General Asphalt, local there in town, like they're the ones that supplied it, and they supplied it when they initially built the track too. So
I gotcha.
There was a pre-existing relationship between the GC, South Florida Motorsports. So that part of it was very easy for us because
interesting.
As far as mix design, aggregates, all that material was handled by others.
Okay.
The hot plant. I mean, essentially all we did is call in our orders, and it was really nice.
Sweet. Well, that's a good deal because I've heard it's been trickier at other.
And it is.
Other recent projects.
And it kind of has to bring a contractor from across the country who has no network here for really anything.
Yeah.
Like it kind of has to be that way. We would have looked at it differently if we would have had to hunt down the material, hunt down a supplier. Like you don't know the supplier. Like if it's in Arizona, bring it on. Yeah, we know who we want to use.
Mm-hmm.
Shoot, probably a couple we could use, but it's just different. You need to know who they are, what they can do, and General Asphalt's good. Like they produce high quality mix.
And they did the hauling for you too.
And they did the hauling. That was a nice thing too. It was kind of all in one.
Okay.
It was all inclusive.
Because hauling in Florida is a crapshoot otherwise. It's some of the trucks they run out there are wild. It's like that thing is 2 miles from just disintegrating.
Yeah. They have a good fleet. We were lucky there. One of the tricky things is traffic in Florida.
Yeah.
Like you cannot predict it.
Mm-hmm.
And something that's very important to paving for smoothness is keeping those pavers moving, keeping your operation moving from the time you start to wherever you're going to stop, the goal is to keep that entire operation moving seamlessly, like no hiccups. And when you can't predict traffic, it's tricky.
And it's tricky too, because you're trying to maintain the right temperature with the mix. So it's not like you can just stack trucks up.
Sure.
And so you do have to adjust as you go, depending on the day. And then again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you stop a paver and start a paver again, that can create a little bit of a bump.
A little bit of a divot, yeah, because you got the weight of that screed. I mean, thousands of pounds. Typically, when it's in motion, it's got material flowing under it, so it's essentially floating. And when you stop,
it sets it down.
It settles.
I see.
The machines we used have a little function called screed lock. So if we did have to stop, which it was not often, maybe a handful of times throughout the entire job, we'd use the screed lock function, which does work a little bit, but it's not. You can still feel the divot a little bit.
And that's less important when you're paving an interstate, but the reason why smoothness is so important is because these cars are going very fast and they need a perfect surface, or else if you do have a divot, you can potentially create wrecks or some unforeseen problems.
Like Formula One cars, race cars in general, but particularly Formula One cars, they don't, the suspension on them, just the way they're set up, the mechanics of them, they don't react to bumps the way you could even imagine because you have driven another car. Like they don't, you hit a bump here, if there's a bump 300 feet down the road, can lead to something.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're driving 65 miles an hour down I-10 and you hit a bump here, you're going to feel a bump here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you upset a car like a Formula One car here, it could be down there.
Yeah.
Where there's something else that starts this whole porpoising effect to the car. Like you can't have bumps. You can't have dips. You can't have waves, because that's another thing. A bump, you've drove through Phoenix and you've felt those longitudinal cracks, every 20 feet or whatever, 15 feet.
Yeah.
Think about that doing 175 miles an hour. If you have something that's 300 feet apart, like that's where it can start porpoising a car.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, everything has to be relative. I mean, as close to perfect as you can get. Like a bump that's here can affect you down the road 200, 400, 500 feet. And you would never imagine that until you think about how fast these cars are going and covering that amount of track at the speed they are with the types of suspension they have. And it has to be perfect.
And so I guess going to that perfect racing surface, you mentioned it a little bit before, Echelon paving.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to pave a 2-lane interstate, typically you pave one lane and then you come back and you pave the other lane. And you can see it in any normal road. There will be a joint in between those two mats because you have that cold mat and that warm mat butting up against each other.
Sure.
And you can roll it. So again, like trucks, cars, everything like that, it doesn't really matter on an interstate. But if you need a perfect racing surface and the track is typically 3 pavers wide, you would have 2 joints in the middle of that surface.
Yep.
If you paved it the traditional way. Echelon paving, you have essentially 3 pavers, 3 paving trains with the 3 buggies in front of them, all staggered together, and you're keeping the mat warm so that you're essentially laying just one giant mat. Is that the best way to explain it?
That's the goal. Yeah.
So as that, I guess, to explain it from my perspective, you back in that first paver and you get that first paver advancing. And then as soon as that first paver starts to pull away, you pull in that second paver and you set that paver up, and then you start to get that advancing. And you can probably explain this next part better than I can, but as that second paver starts to move, you're somewhat overlapping the two in a way. So you're mixing that together. So there's essentially no joint. Is that right?
Yeah, you like to overlap. that's 6 inches to a foot.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the goal, is to take off. The takeoffs are important. Take off as close as you can to each other, and then keep those pavers tight so your mats are, out of all 3 pavers, are as hot as possible while you're overlapping.
Uh-huh.
So it meshes, and kind of when you're rolling it, it'll knead down into, when you're compacting it, it kneads down into what should look like one consistent mat from right to left.
And when there are some joints throughout the track where you're starting and stopping.
Yep.
Right. But did you saw cut each one of those so that it's as perfect as it gets?
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to. So at the end of each day, we'd roll it out and wait for it to cool down. Then we'd have the saw cutter come in and start prepping it for the next day's takeoff, and have a nice saw cut joint to take off on.
And you planned paving this entire surface in these sections. So you knew exactly which sections you were paving which days. And it was, in a perfect world, you had a plan.
Yeah.
I know it changed, but that was, you planned it in sections.
Yeah. So the once we established the different sections, those didn't change. When we paved them, that's where we had to move things around, and because of the other construction going on. And, if they needed to have a crane here to fly, whatever up on the new building, we were able to move our phases. We never paved ourselves into a corner, but, there was a couple days where we could turn around and pave the other direction,
Mm-hmm.
Pave away from, the previous day's paving, or, 2 phases back, or whatever it was. So that's where it got tricky. And then, with that construction, it would interrupt our truck routes through the campus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I don't know if you met our project engineer, Greg. I think we had like just under 40 different phasing maps that we had to build, and new trucking maps, and just trying to keep everybody moving, because we could have the track done, but if the paddock wasn't done, there couldn't be a race.
Sure.
They could have the paddock done, but if we didn't have the track, you know what I mean? So we had to work together. There was just no option. And it was really good.
Wow.
It was good collaboration. We sat in our office trailer for I don't know how many hours, hundreds of hours, figuring out what would be the best way to attack the next day, or 2 days down, look at changing up phasing, and good work between the team, all teams, the GC, Dr. Rob, and then Gazenfar. He played a huge part, and we'd come up with some wild ideas, and he'd bring us back to reality a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And then there was some days where he just had to let us run with our wild ideas, because it's just what we had to do. It's literally no other option.
Yeah, and these, you had a racetrack resume before this, but these guys, they're the world experts at
Sure.
these specific racetracks. And so they, their knowledge. How many tracks Ganzafar's been on? I talked to him a little bit about his career. It's wild. He just goes around the world to whatever the next racetrack is, and that's where he is. And so he's an expert on all of these incredible racetracks.
Yeah.
Which is pretty nice.
It was great to have him. He is, I don't want to say the foremost expert, but he's the foremost expert. He is, we relied a lot on his expertise and his experience. He's wise. That's all he does. The most complex paving projects around the world. So it's good to have him on board and be able to work with him and draw off his experience. And same for him too. I think we brought a few things to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, taught him a few new tricks.
I would never say that.
I just liked how, I think the first time I saw him, he's just wearing like the shoes I'm wearing right now, like Nikes, and they just have asphalt on his Nikes. It's you'd think you'd be better off with boots, but it's I get it too. It's if you're standing all day, I'd probably be rather wearing running shoes, but it was just funny seeing all the asphalt on his running shoes.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a huge focus on safety at our company. It's a big deal to us.
Yeah.
And see him just walking around. He's standing in front of a paver under a shuttle buggy. No hard hat, no PPE, like no boots. Like, dude, what's going on?
The engineers, they can just do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So there's just so many things here. So going back to these, where you would start and stop, that was at those points. Those were arguably some of the most critical points of the whole track, because again, you don't want any kind of bump whatsoever, and that is where you run the risk of a bump.
Yeah,
if anywhere, is where you start and stop. And so when I saw you guys start that one day I was there, you are under a time constraint once that first paver takes off, but at the same time, you don't want to rush it.
Yeah.
Because that point of the whole day is the most critical. And so watching you guys figure out, how to set those 3 pavers off and to make sure that was completely smooth was actually pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's we call it a pressure cooker, but when you take off, typically you have one paver take off and you have a couple guys there and you can tidy up the joint, straight edge it, roll, whatever you need to do. When you have a paver take off, when you're in echelon formation, the second paver is there. So you can't really roll the entire thing. You can barely have any room to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that paver takes off, the amount of work and coordination that it takes to have an echelon take off and get a a nice joint, a nice takeoff to where there's no bumps, no dips. Make sure it's raked properly. Like the raker is probably the most important person there. So there's no segregation. Like when you start raking asphalt, you always have that chance of having segregation. So having the right raker or rakers to take care of a 45-foot wide joint.
Mm-hmm.
When you're typically looking at 12 feet and the paver takes off and everything's out of his way and he can do his raking, you get the roller guy in there and you move down the road.
Yeah.
Like it's not that way with echelon paving. It's making sure the pavers are set, ready to go, take off, get out of the way, and then start working on a 45, 50 foot long joint and multiple straight edges. Like it's cooling down at the same time. And typically the binder that's used on in applications like this is highly polymer modified. So it cools quick.
Mm.
It stiffens up a lot quicker than your typical conventional binder. So you don't have as much working time.
Mm.
So all that stuff it's a pressure cooker.
Yeah. And so asphalt, as it cools down, it gets harder and harder and harder. It's like concrete in a way. Like the more time elapsed, the harder it gets until it's completely set up. It's not going anywhere. It was interesting watching you guys with that straight edge and just trying to make sure that it was exact. And it was like every time I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, that looks perfect to me. But then you'd put it down and you rake a little bit, you put it down, you'd break a little bit. Like to me, I the untrained eye, it's like, yeah, it's all asphalt. It looks good to me. But there was so much involved in those joints. There's so much time spent, so many people involved, and just making sure it was completely seamless between the two.
Yeah, and that we got better as we went on. But one of the other things about taking off is it's the beginning of the shift, and everybody's there. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Just why does that everybody has to show up there?
Yeah.
So there's not just the crew. There's not just people there for testing, not the engineer. There's people from the owners repping the owner. Like it's like everybody shows up.
Yeah.
You talk, it's a pressure cooker.
Well, that was the funniest thing when I first walked up. I think I got off a plane. I flew in at night because you guys were paving at night because of the turnpike, which is another thing to talk about. Paving across the turnpike, and there were like 30 people. I mean, it may not
didn't have to be
30, but it was like it was a significant audience watching. Yeah, there were a lot of people involved, which is not normal.
Why? Come like 2 hours after we start, because that's where it was pretty neat. We'd get through the takeoff, and it's stressful for everybody because if it's not right, then you got to start over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to shut the plant down. I don't know depending on how long it takes, you might have to throw all the mix away that's been on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to pick up, get out of the way, clean up, and it's a complete start over.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not just this is not a quick fix. It's almost like losing a shift. So it has to be perfect. There is no option for it to be anything else.
Yeah.
But the nice thing was after it was after the first shift. I mean, we would take off, we dialed in our joints, and it was kind of like on cruise control. We had to watch a few areas like where we were tying into come around, I believe it's the east side of the stadium, where the tennis courts are, and we had to make sure those tie-ins were, because we were matching existing, but our guys were dialed in. Once they took off, it was just like it was on cruise control. It was good.
And I guess we just talked about it, but the other complexity was like the first day I was there, it was night work, and then the second day I was there, it was day work.
Yeah.
And so there were most everything was paved during the day.
Yeah.
But then there were some nights that you guys had to do because you were crossing the turnpike. And so the turnpike only gives you a window, because if they don't have people going onto the turnpike, it's a toll road.
Yeah, it's a toll.
So they don't want to be losing their revenue. And they don't care if you have a racetrack or not in a way, but they give you a window and you have to do your work when there's the least amount of traffic, which is the middle of the night.
Yeah. I guess the best way to put it is, I mean, they control when you get to cross their right of way,
mm-hmm.
and they wanted it to be when they had the least amount of traffic, and it, I mean, it's at night, right? So we had to switch from our first 2-day shifts of paving. Took that one day off that next day, and then went into nights and crossed the first section. What was the access road, and then the second night is when we crossed the actual turnpike.
Mm-hmm.
Up that crazy turn area.
Yeah.
It was tight and under the bridges, and it was another thing in that area is it narrowed way down. So we had, when we were coming up to it, we planned ahead of time to stop, and we had auger extensions on, and for all 3 pavers to get to the width that we needed them to get to, we had to stop mid production for about 5 minutes per paver.
Huh.
and pull the auger extensions off so our wings could come in narrow enough to fit through that turnpike area.
Mm-hmm.
So we had our mechanics there. It was pretty neat. It worked really well. Like we ran the material down just enough. Those guys pulled off the extensions. That paver would take off, start doing his thing, and then the next paver would come up, and the mechanics, it was almost like a little pit stop for them.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool, and it worked. And man, I went back there and tried to find a little divot, and it was beautiful. It worked perfectly.
And I guess that's the other complexity here, is that it's not, again, just a straight road. There's turns. The width is varying.
Yep.
So there's you're paving multiple widths as the track widens and narrows, and then the area that you were talking about, some of these turns are wild and tight. How do you have to? What are the considerations when you're paving around these pretty tight areas?
As far as like what the machines can do?
Yeah. Is there additional coordination between the machines, between the rollers, how you have to pave it? Or is it similar to how you pave anything straight? You're just turning as you go?
No, I mean, in those areas where it narrowed down and we knew we were going to be going quite a bit slower just to get through those turns, there was a significant incline to come up onto FDOT right away.
Mm-hmm.
We pulled a couple rollers off. We knew the pavers were going to be slower. We didn't need as many rollers, and it was significantly narrower. So, yeah, I mean, the planning is just making sure on the backside, it's easy to manage the rolling. That was an easy part of it. When you're turning like that, it's hard to keep the pavers with material. It's hard to feed the pavers because trucks are straight.
Mm-hmm.
And the shuttle buggies have to come into the truck straight. So what we were doing is essentially shuttling material back to back to the pavers from the truck. So we had our 3 buggies going. We'd have one up getting material off a truck while the other 2 were feeding the pavers, keeping them going. When a buggy would run out, then he would run up, grab another load, and then we'd maneuver the other buggy in place. And we kept them moving that way because it was so tight there. And then, the bridge, we had to contend with that. We were a little bit high on that, but it just, how tight it was, that was tricky. And when you're moving that slow, that equipment doesn't like to turn, like it normally should. It's tricky. But there's certain areas where you got to speed up a little bit to make sure the machine's got enough speed to climb the hill and turn at the same time. Like just the way the hydraulic pressures run through those pavers, they don't like to be going at 4 feet a minute or 8 feet a minute. They like a little bit more speed. So managing the speed, understanding what the machine's going to need to get when you get to a certain point to make a turn, climb a hill, start turning the other way. Well, not outrunning the other pavers and the rollers and outrunning your feed. So, yeah, our paving superintendents, they did a good job of, there's a certain amount of pre-planning, but then just communication in real time, keeping the pavers, in communication. Like everybody had radios or whatever, but making sure you're talking to the forward paver, knowing his speed, and the middle paver, the rear paver, and just keeping their feet per minute where they need to be so they're not outrunning each other, and just keeping your fingers on the little things. And it's night. It's hard to see. That particular shift, we couldn't mill through FDOT right away, so we had the milling right out ahead, which we hadn't done before. We had usually given ourselves a shift or 2 to make sure we had enough room ahead of us. But that was tricky. And then cleaning after the milling, they have to clean and make sure it's essentially clean enough to eat off before they'd let us tack it and pave it. And it was right down to the wire, and being able to open it when FDOT needed it open, it was tight. It was tight.
After the milling, how did you have to clean it?
Power brooms and blowers.
Yeah. So they wanted all the dust off, huh?
Yeah, and it's tricky with that material. It's what they paved during first construction. The rock they used was a lime rock, so it's white. You probably noticed the dust when we were cleaning. It's just like a white powder, that lime rock. And so when we'd mill, it essentially cuts through pieces of aggregate when you're milling. So it exposes whatever aggregate you're cutting through. And with this lime rock, it would just kept shedding little dust particles. It was a kind of a bugger and that was the entire track. Like the entire time we were there, it was just clean and clean and clean and blow and sweep. It was more effort than I would have imagined, or than I did imagine, on cleaning behind the milling. And the idea was to get a car going, or a truck, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour and not see any dust. And that's how we knew if it was clean enough. So
really?
Yeah.
Nice.
See Gazenfar hauling ass. God damn, see dust.
Did you have to set up the drums on the mills in a particular way?
We didn't. We rebuilt them. We rebuilt them is really all we did. There was no special setup. Like you can see some requirements for different types of micro milling or whatever.
Yeah.
There was no specific tool spacing or anything like that.
Okay.
We wanted a nice clean cut, and we knew we could get it, and we did.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've seen, when I went to Circuit of the Americas, I saw some micro milling.
Yeah.
With Lone Star out there, and that was the first time I'd really seen it, and that it was pretty interesting. I mean, that surface that they leave behind is
legit.
It is legit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the test there was the track manager at the time. They had a company Ferrari, and would get in the Ferrari and would just tear across the surface, and then tear across the surface, and then tear across the surface, and say, all right, yeah, bump's not there anymore. And then go to the next area. And it's like, this is the QC process. He just gets in the car and races across it. I guess
honestly, like you can get a straight edge and get out there and it can look perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But there's little things that you can't see that are there at times under a straight edge that you will feel in a car.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, you're trying to make it smooth for a car. So that is, I mean, I love that way of testing it. I mean, it is the best way. Like,
well, in a fast car, like you can drive over at 40, still not feel it. Yeah, in a pickup truck compared to a Ferrari, it's like, I guess you need that. Are there? I've tried to cover the process the best I can based on my knowledge. Am I missing any major components of the actual paving process?
Did you look at my notes? I think we didn't really talk about. We talked about the interview. A little bit of pre-construction before we got to the site, getting everybody there, tracking down equipment, making sure we had all the right equipment, how we got it there, how we got our people there. I don't know if you wanted to maybe touch base on that.
Yeah. Get into the logistics.
Little army across the.
Yeah. How do you, how many people did you have to move out there?
A lot.
It was a big crew.
Yeah. I think it was about 70, I think 100 people in total between subs and consultants, with survey and QC and the different aspects of QC that made up, our little program.
Mm-hmm.
And then our internal forces, our Sunland people that made the trek over with us. Just under 100. Might have been 90 to 95, something like that.
Did you ship all the equipment from Arizona?
We shipped probably 90% of it from out of state. So not all from Arizona.
Yeah.
We tracked down some of the equipment that we wanted. Like there was a couple pavers that we really wanted. They came out of Moorhead, Minnesota.
Okay.
A couple of our rollers came out of Utah. Some of our hom rollers came out of Moorhead as well. And then we got one shuttle buggy came from the East Coast.
Gotcha.
So it was a little tricky because we were hot and heavy in the season.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's the season's going because in Arizona you pave year round. There's no off season typically.
Very, very little.
And this was in January.
Yeah, we started mobbing out in January.
The weather's nice in Phoenix in January.
Yeah.
The weather's nice in February. The weather's nice in March. Do you want to try to do as much paving as you can while the weather's nice? Because then when summer goes around, you're still paving, but to stand behind a warm mat when it's 115 degrees out,
toasty.
It's beyond toasty. I remember when I was working my first summer in construction, we did some paving out on the project I was at because it was a pipe job. And so it wasn't production paving. It was just cleaning stuff up. And I remember standing on the mat right after they'd paved though, and it was so hot. I got a bloody nose. And it's just like that's how hot and dry it is out there. Is like my nose is bleeding because it's so hot. And it was one of those days where it was like 110, 112, 115 degrees, and it is just a different world.
If you don't do it every day, you got to ease yourself into it.
Yes. No, seriously. Yeah. If you go hang out behind a paver for the whole day, yeah, you're going to get heat exhaustion if you're not used to it.
Right.
So you're trying to do as much paving in the winter as you can, which is a little bit different than a lot of the other parts of the country.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that paving was seasonal until I left Arizona. And that's like, oh yeah, you can't do this when it's snowing, I guess. So you have to track down all this equipment, and then I take it you have to bring spares of your equipment as well.
Yeah, we had to have spares. That was one of the things that were specified. We did use a good amount of our own, but they had an hour specification in their equipment couldn't have over a certain amount of hours. And
really,
where we were at in turning over our fleet, we do that every couple of years when our equipment hits certain hours. A couple of the key pieces were kind of up against that time. We were trying to get a couple more months out of them, whatever it was. So that's where we started tracking down a couple pieces. And since it was in January, we were looking through RDO equipment. One of our dealers that we work with closely, we looked at some northern states, and that's where Moorhead, they've got a decent size, or they've got a decent amount of equipment over there sitting in the winter. So
I got you.
we pulled a couple pavers out of there, and they were beautiful. I mean, they're nearly brand new.
Uh-huh.
One of them when we got down there on the test pass, one of the final drives blew out on the track. So our first test pass was a complete disaster because only two pavers made it. So we had an empty pass. This brand new paver sitting back there. The final drive blew out, so we had to ship one in.
Woof.
And the next one went off without a hitch. So we hit it out of the park on the next one. But yeah, it's tracking down equipment, and not just tracking it down, but also figuring out how to get it there.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't want to depend, or we didn't want to think that we could depend on anybody locally. We knew the equipment we wanted to use. We tracked it down if we didn't have it. And there was just no question. When we shipped it there, it was going to be our equipment. We knew everything about it, and we weren't depending on anybody. We couldn't take that risk to think that we could go down there and track down the equipment we wanted. Plus, in Florida, they can work nearly year round too.
Yeah,
right?
they're full bore. Yeah.
It's not easy to track down the type of equipment that we needed in the part of the country that we're going to or coming from. So reached out to some of the northern states, and they really came through for us.
But then when it came to the technology, I think you did have local partners there that were helping to get everything dialed in.
Support.
Yeah,
Yep.
support.
So
yeah.
we brought our technology over, and then we had a local dealer support us with some help.
Mm-hmm.
But we also brought trusted advisors, I guess.
Yeah.
With us from Phoenix, people that we've worked with for a lot of years on, like Total Station, that all our UTS stuff. Like we brought, like our survey group that we work with every day in Phoenix. We trust them, and coming over, having a tight timeline, and working with people that we didn't know, no matter how well they know their equipment.
Yeah.
It just wasn't worth it to us to not have the people there that we trust and can hit the ground running. And it ended up paying off. The local support was great too. But we really needed those people our partners for years, right? So.
And then when you're choosing crews, you want really qualified individuals, but then you're also juggling with who's available.
Sure.
And then who's willing to go to the other side of the country for a month.
Sure.
So I'm sure you started with availability and then worked your way from there.
Yeah. And honestly, it wasn't that hard. There was a lot of people that wanted to come. There was a couple that weren't so excited about it, but
yeah,
we did really good at like the first round of reaching out and asking crews, because it's not just a crew. I mean, it's three of our mainline paving crews that we had to pull together and kind of chop it up and look at who would work better where. So I mean, we had to run 3 shuttle buggies all at once and 3 pavers all at once. So we did a little moving around, and we actually did some testing in the yard in Phoenix to make sure we were comfortable with moving people around and making sure they're, settled into their new position for a little bit. But yeah, it wasn't, there was a lot of people that most of them were on board with coming over.
What do you think taking 3 mainline crews out and put them somewhere else for a month, that's a significant amount of production too that you would get back home?
Yeah.
Because the track, it's like over 2 miles.
Yeah, it's
roughly
3.36 miles.
3.36 miles. So for 3-4 weeks of work, 3 mainline crews paving 3-point-something miles compared to what they would do normally. If you just looked, I know the dollars are different. It has to make sense from a financial standpoint. But if you looked at how many miles they would pave back home in the same amount of time, it would be a significant difference.
Yeah, it's something you gotta look at. I mean, when you're initially looking at the job, it's something you gotta weigh. Like, is it worth it to us? Is it worth it from a global standpoint for the company? Does it make sense for the company? And it worked in our schedule. So we had a slot in our schedule where it worked. So it kind of, the stars aligned, I guess. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
But you hit a month after that time period, it may not have worked with our schedule. And you gotta, we consider, I mean, our customers are huge to us, right? They're a big deal to us. You got to consider like what we would be doing to our long-term customers that some of them we've been doing work with for over 40 years, right? So it hit everything, the stars aligned on everything, it seemed like.
You get through this whole process. The race was in May?
Yeah.
You went to the race?
I did.
I know, and it's interesting now that I've had kind of an inside track on this. You can go build the perfect racetrack and it can look perfect to you guys. Ganzafar could say, yep, this is exactly what we wanted. Everybody can say yes. But until the drivers get on it, you still don't have that 100% certainty that, yes, this is exactly the product that we needed. And I know the drivers can be opinionated on some things when it comes to racing surfaces. I know they can be very particular. Like one of the things is grip, for example. I know grip is so essential to these cars, and a new track too. New asphalt is a lot different than old asphalt when it comes to grip, because the tires, as they go over the surface, are leaving behind rubber and are interacting with the surface in a different way. So were you nervous going into that period, like awaiting that final approval?
Yeah,
like the teacher to give you the grade on your test.
I would say I was about 50% certain. There's a decent amount of work that had to be done to texturize and the track surface before they could race on it. So after we paved, there was other work going on.
Oh, really?
So the what you want is, and I'm not going to get it all into it. That's not my area of expertise, but rubber on asphalt bitumen is not good. So that's not where you get your most grip. You want rubber on virgin aggregate. So we went and paved a beautiful track. Like it was sweet, but then you got to drive on it. So
sure.
The GC and Dr. Rob and Gazenfar, they employed a company to come out and do some burnishing, I believe is what they called it, or some sort of a texturing to help remove some of the bitumen off the rock. I'm not sure exactly what all they did, but they'd remove some of it. But then when you do that, you're taking away from the life of the track too. So there's a balance where how much grip do you want? How much life do you want?
Sure.
It's an expensive track. We just paved it, right? So there's so many things that weigh into what you want to do to it. And then you're right. Once they get out there, if it's not perfect, then, a car lets loose and hits a wall, maybe take them out of the weekend. That's not good. So there's a tremendous balance. You got to weigh a lot of things and make sure it's balanced for that owner, and with Formula One, the FIA, with Gazenfar and his company, like everybody, I think they did a really good job of selecting the surface texture that they wanted. And probably could have got a little more grip, but at what point do you start degrading the asphalt so much that you got to repave in 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is?
Yeah.
So they did a good job there. But yeah, back to your original question is, I was about 50% certain that we did a really good job until the race, until actually practice felt a little better than after the race. I thought the cars had good grip.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a lot of good a lot of good feedback on smoothness. I was really worried about the back straight where you come out of FDOT's right away off the turnpike.
Yeah.
And you go down the back straight, and it's a fast section. I was worried about that.
It's a long section too.
Yeah, I was worried about it because that's where things that are hard to test for, they show up. And even though we did more testing than you can ever imagine on that,
because that's where they're at their fastest.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we had one of our phases was in that area, so we had a phasing joint there, which turned out perfect. The track widened there. It went from a narrow area coming out of FDOT right away, and it widened out. So there was a lot of things that we went through, a lot of challenges in that area, and it was a little concerning. But after practice, I was feeling a lot better. I think we all were.
How do you get the feedback? Do you hear the feedback, or is it basically just like you're watching the race like anybody else, or the qualifying practice?
I've texted a couple people during the race, but
yeah.
I mean, you want to hear what the drivers say. That's the ultimate feedback.
Yeah.
And I think it was all good. I didn't hear any negative. They were happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny listening to, I think I was watching about Vegas, and just, it's funny how, the drivers are so sensitive, and they can tell when things aren't a certain way or are a certain way. And just hearing how they explain things is very, very funny. How they, it's this turn, here's what's going on this turn, like, because they know it's a new track. Mm-hmm. They know it's a new surface. Yeah. And so, it's interesting to hear how they what their perspective is on it versus like someone who's building its perspective, what your perspective, because it's a totally different way to look at it. And they're ultimately, in a way, the customer. They're the end user.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, a thought that we were all having during construction, is making sure that they were happy, right? Because we're like, what are they going to say? Like, one comment from one of those guys is, it can not be good.
Yeah, but, that's all it takes.
But they see it and they feel it at a different level, right? So their goal is to push that car to the very limit, whatever that is. They want to get it there, and if that track isn't letting them do that, I can understand why it can be frustrating. If there's a bump coming into a turn, it upsets the car, and they can't pull through the turn like they should. Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't deliver a track that can let them push that car right to the edge, I get it. I understand it.
Yeah.
And if they're the type of people that they're putting their life on that's what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they're pushing their self to the limit. They expect to push their car to the limit, and they expect to have a surface to handle it. And that's, I feel like we delivered that about as perfect as you can deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, it turned out really good.
Yeah, that was exciting watching the race and hearing the feedback, and especially it was like, I was standing at that turn 3 months prior, 4 months prior, whenever it was like, that's pretty cool. I have like the inside track on how this all came to be, and then seeing that final product. But it also must be so cool because you don't get that level of feedback on your products typically. Right. Like, there's not this one moment where you put all this work and time into something, and then you see it work at like a very high level. Like, when you pave an interstate or pave the 101 or the 202, you pave it and then it opens back up, and then there's cars. Like,
there's
cool.
Cars.
Yeah. And it's like, sure, there's some satisfaction there, but like it doesn't get any more satisfying than that, seeing that surface that you just put down get pushed to the absolute limit of automotive and I don't even know what it is. Like, but just pushed to the absolute limit. It must be pretty cool. And then you got to go to the race too, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, it was cool. After I felt a big weight lifted off my shoulder, it was really cool to you just go back thinking about everything that went into pulling it off, getting all the people there, getting all the subs on board, making it all line up,
Mm-hmm.
like making it happen. Like that in itself is, to me, I think back every once in a while, like, man, like I work for a company that let me take a pretty decent risk, let our team, let us assemble a team, and then we actually pulled it off and we executed. Like it's hard to summarize because there's so much detail that went into it. It's like, to summarize it doesn't really do it justice, because all the pre-planning meetings, I mean, it was like 4 to 5 a day. It seemed like for a month leading up to it, and it worked. Everything, when you look back at everything we did pre-construction, I'm glad we did it now. Even when we were there, like, is this necessary? Are we bringing in the right people? Are we talking to the right people? Do we have the right plan? And I look back now, like, I would do it the same because it worked. It was just an idea at first. Like, we got to get all these people there. We got to get this equipment there. And then putting all that stuff together to make the idea work. Like, it was something I've never done. Obviously, we've never done it. And to pull it off at such a high level with, our project management team, and just everybody stepped up and performed on another level, just because we had to. It was, at times, I felt, and I'm sure they felt like they just wanted to break, but pulled through and made it happen. And it was, I don't know, it was pretty awesome.
It was super cool. I mean, there's only 3 of those tracks in America, and you don't pave them every year. And and there's a lot of paving contractors in America. So there's a lot of options out there, a lot of great paving companies all across the country. And to be the not just the company, but the team that actually does it, it's a pretty cool feather in your cap. Like, yeah, it's pretty sweet.
I think a cool stat is we didn't take 1 ton of asphalt out, so everything we put down stayed in place.
Wow.
Like, that is not something I thought I would be sitting here and able to say. Like, we put it down and it stayed. So
yeah,
it was, that in itself, I think, is successful.
Well, sweet. I've looked forward to just talking this through, breaking it down. I mean, I've told so many people about this job. Everybody wants to know about Miami, Vegas. Vegas was, did you ever go out there and see?
I didn't.
That was wild. that was a wild one. Just in Las Vegas paving is Las Vegas paving. Like, their trucks say we're number 1, which I just find hilarious, but it also is like completely true. Like, yeah, they are number 1 in that market. They're really good at what they do. But just seeing that operation, and then drunks walking right by it, by the Bellagio fountains, 5 in the morning. It's like, this is so wild. Are people walking through the right of way, this and that, and then the funniest part about it, I was telling someone about this last night. If you stand looking north on the strip, you've got the northbound on your right, southbound on the left. Southbound is the racing surface. The northbound, it's like typical asphalt that's been sitting there for a while.
Yeah.
Under that sun, years after years after year. It's rough. And then you look at the left, the southbound, it's the most beautiful asphalt in the world. The contrast between the two is like, where else do you have this contrast between Vegas and the most beautiful asphalt, beautiful strip of paving in the entire world, the newest. And then there's a project in Switzerland where they changed the runway from concrete to asphalt that everybody likes to talk about. But I've been doing a lot of talking about this, so it'll be nice to have this podcast to send them here. Just listen to this. You'll learn everything you need to know.
On that Vegas track, like, my hats off to them. I don't know who ran it from the contractor side, but it had to have been a nightmare.
Oh,
we had our challenges. We had a tremendous amount of challenges. But this is probably the one thing that was nice is it's their home. They were home.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't even imagine the challenges with trunks, like you said, walking there. And
they had to rebuild the whole cross section. So it was
right.
It was 4 passes for everything. I think 2 like sub layers, a leveling course, and then the surface course. So to do that around the entire thing while working on the Las Vegas Strip, it's insane. But no, I'm glad you're able to come by, talk this over. I look forward to this. Yeah. If people want to learn more about Sunland, is it just sunland.com or sunlandasphalt.com or
sunlandasphalt.com?
Sunlandasphalt.com. And I take it you guys, you're hiring people all the time for all kinds of stuff with how much is going on.
We're hiring people all the time for any position you can think of.
Not just in Arizona. You all are in different markets.
Yeah. So we have an office in Vegas. We've got an office just outside Phoenix and Tucson, Albuquerque, and I believe Denver, Colorado. I think we just moved out of Littleton.
Awesome.
So we have an office in Denver now.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah.